Namaste, Jai Hind, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on this edition of The Right Stand. I'm Anand Narasimhan. Are we as Bharat the most vibrant democracy across the world, where people enjoy unabated freedom to a level perhaps not witnessed in any other nation across the world? Or are we an elected autocracy? That means we have elections, yes, but our systems are gradually becoming more and more autocratic, and perhaps we should rank with the likes of Pakistan and Bangladesh. A Sweden-based outfit called V-Dem, Varieties of Democracy, the V-Dem Institute, founded by Stefan I. Lindberg in 2014, that studies the qualities of various governments, has the following to say about Bharat in its latest report. And this is a continuing series. They said this in 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, and now even in 2024. India is ranked 104 on the Liberal Democracy Index. They have a quadrant. And in that, India is among the worst autocracies in recent years. That's what they say. Sedition, defamation, counter-terrorism is being used to silence critics. Political opponents and government critics face intimidation. Silencing of dissent in academia is currently prevalent. Government continues to suppress freedom of religious rights. They do this to more than 202 entities across the world, ladies and gentlemen. And they have come out to say that Bharat right now is in the same grouping as nations like Pakistan and Bangladesh. Do you agree, disagree? Is this who we are? Or should entities, outfits like V-Dem, who have been called as the most important provider of quantitative democracy data for scholarly research by political scientists like Daniel Hegedus, should they be called out for their perhaps biased and unscientific reporting of Bharat or presentation portrayal of Bharat? Let's go straight across to our guest. There are more data points to share. We'll do that through the course of the conversation. Professor Salvatore Babones, academician and sociologist, joins us. Lavanya Vemsani ji, author, joining us at this point. Sanju Verma, national spokesperson of the BJP, with us. And Sanjay Jha, author and also one who's perennially been questioning the functioning of the government under the aegis leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a Congress leader himself, joining us at this point. Namaste. Thank you very, very much to everybody. Professor Salvatore Babones, you have done a paper about these outfits, calling out the likes of Freedom House and V-Dem. How much of credence should one give to this report? And is Bharat truly an elected autocracy and one of the worst autocracies in the last decade?
I don't think we can take evaluations like that from the Varieties of Democracy Institute very seriously. Now, I can't tell you what the quality of Indian democracy is, but neither can V-Dem. I mean, just to put their statistics into perspective, according to V-Dem, India has far worse quality of democracy than Nepal. India is rated 110th in the world. Nepal is rated 55th. Maldives at 70, Sri Lanka at 75, despite having just gone through an irregular transition in government. Indonesia, which recently declared Islamic law and elected a suspected mass killer as its president, is rated 80th, while India is down at 110. Now, good news for India, at least it's above Pakistan at 118. Okay, so I don't think we can take these evaluations very seriously, because ultimately these evaluations are based on the subjective judgments of people living in the countries themselves. And while Indians may feel, that is, Indian intellectuals may feel that Indian democracy is suffering severe challenges, well, what does it take to be a member of the intelligentsia in Maldives? The Maldives intelligentsia rates Maldives relatively well. Maybe that's not so surprising given the relatively restrictive nature of Maldives society.
So would you give credence to this? And why is it that they would bunch India with the likes of Pakistan and Bangladesh, Professor Babones?
first of all, I always emphasize it's not V-Dem raiding India, it's Indians raiding India. V-Dem uses a methodology that primarily surveys people in the country themselves. So political scientists, journalists, writers, other intellectuals in the country being studied. There are international experts involved, but they make up the minority of the V-Dem panel. So it's not that V-Dem from Sweden is taking a negative view of Indian democracy. It's that the Indians who report to V-Dem take a very negative view of Indian democracy. And if I can give you just one last statistic to put it into context, V-Dem now rates Indian democracy lower than at any time during the 1976-78 1975-77 emergency. So elections in India today are rated as of lower quality than the 1977 election, at the time of which 10,000 or more political figures were still in prison. The press was still being repressed. The emergency wasn't ended until the day after the election. I find it incredible to think that Indian democracy today is in worse shape than it was under Indira Gandhi's emergency. That's my own qualitative judgment, but really this is something for Indians to work out for themselves.
11 states ruled either by the opposition India bloc or neutral parties in Bharat. No single party won over 38% votes. The BJP got 37.7% in 2019. At the same time, the Congress got about 20% votes. So that's the situation. 61 crore people out of 90 crore plus enrollments in 2019, they came out and voted. But we are an electoral autocracy, Sanjay Jhaji?
Anand, we are a democratically elected dictatorship. Let me disagree with the former panelist who spoke on the emergency. The emergency was a formal declaration of a suspension of civil liberties done as per the provisions of the Constitution, and they lasted a period of 21 months. Under Mr. Modi, since 2014, we have had an undeclared emergency, stealthy, which is what is called as an elected autocracy, an illiberal democracy. The gentleman needs to be aware of what is happening in India today. Anand, you are aware that in the mayoral election in Chandigarh, there was an open fraud being done on camera by the presiding officer who was changing the votes to make a BJP candidate win. That is a sign of a democracy in decline. It's a democratic recession, or worse, a democratic depression. Look at the verdict of the Supreme Court today. The Supreme Court has said that electoral bonds, which is, by the way, a source of political corruption, a very opaque form of funding, and anybody on your panel should be knowing that if your campaign finance is tainted or corrupted, a democracy is in danger, because it means there is crony capitalism flourishing, it means there is plutocracy, it means probably the government is actually working in cahoots with big business. That makes for a very unhealthy democracy. And look at the way this government, Anand, tried to subvert the disclosure of that information through the leading Bank of India, and the Supreme Court has almost held the State Bank of India for contempt for denying that information or disclosure. Point number 3, this government has amended the process of electing the Chief Election Commissioner by removing the Chief Justice of India and actually putting the executive in the selection of the election commissioner. Can you imagine the world's largest democracy going through elections where the election commission, which is supposed to be an independent constitutional body, is infiltrated with nominees of the government? I have given you 3 instances of a blatant disrespect for democratic norms. Point number 4, you know what, at the end of the day, if you read the V-Dem report, I have been reading them consistently. Look at the way the opposition is being wiped out in this country. The harassment done through the agencies like ED, CBI, and income tax, opposition leaders in jail, media freedom being curtailed, a lot of people actually in the Right to Information Act being diluted, people actually having the fear of a defamation suit, a police investigation, or an FIR if they were going to be critical of this government. So in short, India is not the mother of democracy. It is seeing a murder of democracy in broad daylight.
Well, I have not had the Congress party come to my show for the last 6 years and they are in opposition. Wonder what will happen if they were to come to government. But, Sanju Verma, please respond.
Thank you. Anand, Hindi में कहावत है, हाथी के दांत खाने के और दिखाने के और. And when a suspended Congress leader on your show waxes eloquent about how democracy has come undone under the aegis of Prime Minister Modi, it is laughable. And I'll tell you why. And I will give you a pointed rebuttal. First and foremost, almost 23 crore, 230 million people voted for the BJP en masse in the 2019 general elections. For you to sit here and say that, what we are witnessing is a closed autocracy or an electoral autocracy, which is what V-Dem would have you believe, is absolutely, a bunch of falsehoods. If ever democracy came undone in India, it was when Jawaharlal Nehru in 1951 passed the first amendment to the constitution curtailing free speech. Then it was in 1976 that Indira Gandhi passed the 42nd amendment curtailing the power of judicial review by the high courts. Then you had Rajiv Gandhi, who tried to bring the anti-defamation law in 1988. Thank God it did not pass through both houses of parliament and failed to become a law. I will not even go so far as saying that the worst and the most devious chapter in India's post-independent history is 1975, when Indira Gandhi rode roughshod over a court judgment to pronounce emergency. To this charge that, opposition leaders are being jailed by the Enforcement Directorate and the CBI, let me say this. If hypothetically I have to believe that the Enforcement Directorate and the CBI are handmaidens of the government, pray tell me, why is it that the Supreme Court, which is impartial, which is not biased, the highest apex court, the highest judicial body in India, has repeatedly denied bail to a Sanjay Singh of the Aam Aadmi Party, to a Satyendra Jain of the Aam Aadmi Party, to a Manish Sisodia of the Aam Aadmi Party? This is the same Supreme Court which Sanjay Jha just cited a couple of minutes back, which, while staying Rahul Gandhi's conviction in the criminal defamation case where he's called all Modis as thieves, the Supreme Court, what did it say? I will read ad verbatim in 20 seconds what the Supreme Court said about Rahul Gandhi and castigated him in no uncertain terms. The Supreme Court said, a man of Rahul Gandhi's standing, who's been in public life for so long, should choose his words with more care, more discretion, and he should not give in to these outbursts of emotions, which is what Rahul Gandhi does so frequently, showcasing why many people still refer to him as Pappu. Now, the most important argument is this: V-Dem, as Professor Dabonis said, V-Dem, we all know, you just have to Google, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know this. V-Dem is funded by the George Soros and the Pierre Omidyar network. George Soros has no love lost for the Modi dispensation, and there have been ample proofs of that in the recent past. What I find hilarious is that V-Dem, recently, about 1.5 to 2 years back, it had ranked India lower than Sri Lanka in the World Happiness Index. And within months of that, Sri Lanka went bankrupt, with people, the civilians, actually raiding the presidential palace in Sri Lanka. India had to send food, water, medical supplies to Sri Lanka for its very survival. Which country does V-Dem say is the happiest country in the world? It says Finland is the happiest country in the world. And which country has the highest suicide rate in the world? It is Finland, which has the highest suicide rate in the world. Then let us talk about, some other findings by V-Dem. V-Dem says that, United States is a great democracy. I'll give you some data. This data says that 14% of the American population is black. But do you know what percentage of America's population is in prison or in the lockup? 47%. It says for every 100,000 people in America, 901 people are languishing in prison even without a trial. Then the second biggest non-white minority in the US is Hispanics. Hispanics form 19% of American population, and the incarceration rate for Hispanics is 434 for every 100,000, whereas for the white population in America, the incarceration rate is just 181 people for every 100,000. Now you compare that with, in 30 seconds I will end my argument. You compare that with what is happening in India. Muslims form about 14 to 15% of India's population in a country of 1.4 billion, 140 crore people. Now what I find very surprising is that though Muslims account for only 14% of India's population, I have given this data on your show, Anand, a zillion times, and I would like to reinforce it. It needs to be said. 31% of Prime Minister's Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the allocation is to minorities, particularly Muslims. 33% of PM Ayushman Bharat Yojana, the allocation is to minorities, especially Muslims. 36% of Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, the allocation is for minorities, particularly Muslims. And 37% of the world's largest self-employment scheme called Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, 37% of the allocation is for minorities, particularly Muslims. And in the last 10 years of the Modi dispensation,
Right.
10 crore, which is 100 million. 10 crore people have been given access to higher education and scholarships from the minority community
you are
alone,
quoting,
and you sit here and give a lecture to the Modi
you are
government
quoting
that
data,
minorities are being dehumanized, that there is no freedom of expression.
You're quoting data, but Lavanya Vemsani ji, the V-Dem report has no statistics or data given on serious claims like curtailment of freedom of expression, compromised media independence, harassment of journalists and opposition intimidation. A lot of things have been said. Bharat has been equated to El Salvador in page 16. On page 16, on what basis? What is the number? Alleged censorship. India's alleged censorship is compared with El Salvador without giving any data again in page 16.
Right.
So how can scholarly work be given without any data?
Yeah.
And
that is exactly where the actual problem is. We don't know where the survey is conducted. We don't know what the exact data is. And they say each country has 5 expert judges. So who are these 5 expert judges that make judgments on data, what is collected? And the data, as it shows, is slanted because the way it is collected. Probably it is collected from intellectuals and educated population within India, which has different view from the rural folks and what is happening in the villages. So the way the data might have been collected might have contributed to a slanted view of India. And one more point is that the people who are disgruntled have more incentive to speak about it rather than the people who are satisfied with it. So the data collection itself probably was deriving the disgruntled population.
But the method of data collection is also not mentioned. Where they have collected the sample, what is the sample size is not mentioned. They are just saying that they are looking at indicators and indices.
Right. We don't know how they are looking. And we don't know who are filling this survey. And we don't know which media houses are using what survey. And we don't know exactly how many respondents answered. And we don't know the rural background, urban background, or what is it. And we don't know how these 5 judges sit and decide a country of 1.4 billion as autocracy. How is it an autocracy when people have freedom to express? The point itself shows that the more people contributed to this survey and answered in a disgruntled way, in a slanted way, but answer itself shows that there is freedom of expression. If there is no freedom of expression, it will be like Maldives or some other country where the survey would come out differently. The survey would be more positive because more people are not speaking. If they are speaking, of course, it is going to be like this, which is an expression of freedom itself.
But the report says Kosovo and Nepal are ranked higher. Kosovo, which is independent in 2008, Nepal, republic since 2008, 13 prime ministerial tenures in 16 years, but it's very democratic and very independent. Civil war, ethnic conflict, insurgency, internal disturbances, nations like Sri Lanka, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, Tunisia and Botswana. They all rank higher than Bharat. This
Right.
is
Nigeria is higher, Niger is higher,
Well-
and Sri Lanka is higher, and Sweden is always on top. It's in one or
Sweden's
two.
always on
No,
top.
no,
that
sir.
design-
No, the Kingdom of Sweden, please. The Kingdom of Sweden, the Kingdom of Belgium, the Kingdom of Denmark, the Kingdom of Norway, and the United Kingdom, Kingdom of Bhutan. They are best democracies. They are the best democracies. Professor Babonis.
Lavanya, it's great to see you. And like Lavanya, look, I'm here to talk about the measurement of democracy, not to score political points. I think neither Lavanya and I are both academics. BJP, Congress, it's not our fight, right? That's your fight, and it's one you should have in a democracy. Look, like Sanjay said, electoral bonds are fundamentally not a democratic way to bring in campaign contributions. However, as a comparative social scientist, I look at India's electoral bonds. They're just as clean as Australia's registered associations. In Australia, anyone can give unlimited amounts to a political party. The way it works is you give it to a non-for-profit organization. That not-for-profit organization gives it to the party. They declare it. ABC Company gave $10 million to a party. Who gave it to ABC Company? Nobody knows. Now, that's not a good way to do democracy, but that's the way it's done in Australia, in India, in the United States, in many ways in the United Kingdom. Similarly, the Electoral Commission being political appointees. Well, again, that's done in the United States. Now, I don't think it's very good. I don't approve of it. But when I try to rank things comparatively, I ask, what do other democracies do? And if other recognized democracies do it, it's not so much a problem for India. Now, counter Sanja, Soros funding for the V-Dem Institute is irrelevant. It's a tiny amount of funding to fund a conference. V-Dem is fundamentally founded by the European Research Council. V-Dem is not an evil organization that's attempting to subvert Indian democracy because someone's paying it to do so. V-Dem is merely reflecting the views of India's own intellectuals when they're asked to rate Indian democracy. These are the solid facts from an academic perspective. The issue here, and I wish both people on the BJP side and the Congress side would realize, this is not an evaluation of the BJP's performance in office. V-Dem is an evaluation of the Indian system. And I would encourage all Indians to come together to realize that evaluation is fundamentally out of kilter with the reality of India, at least as I've experienced it over the last 4 years of research.
So they say 4,200 scholars for 202 countries. That's on an average about 21 country experts who are judging the country.
Yeah.
So who are these 21? Who are these 21 country experts who are judging Bharat? Now here the criticism going Sanju Verma's way or the BJP ruling disposition's way is that in the last 10 years, if you have not been able to even figure out these 21 intellectuals who are going ahead and rating Bharat with some entity like V-Dem, then something needs to be, then there's some serious correction that is required.
The very eloquent and the very well-read Mr. S. Jaishankar was asked about the V-Dem report. He said V-Dem talks about democracy and electoral autocracy in the same breath, and that is nothing short of hypocrisy. So point number one, I don't take the V-Dem report seriously, but since you're having a discussion, I chose to be on your panel and I'm glad that I'm a part of it. You know, I completely disagree with Professor Babonis. You know, he may have his compulsions as an academician, what have you, to sit here and say, oh, the V-Dem report is not an indictment of Narendra Modi or the BJP necessarily. The V-Dem report is only a textual description of what is happening in India. Excuse me, for second time in a row in 2019, Narendra Modi came back with more than a 2/3 majority, which means that a large part of India's population believes that what Modi is doing, be it his welfare politics, be it the structural reforms that he's carrying out, or for that matter, what V-Dem has chosen to ignore, right from the, United Nations chief Antonio Guterres to a Bill Gates to the World Economic Forum chairman Klaus Schwab, they've all said that the world's largest and fastest vaccination drive at the height of the COVID pandemic, thanks to Narendra Modi, thanks to India, the world healed much faster. So for us to sit here and take lectures from 21 intellectuals or 5 intellectuals is not par for the course. And when Professor Babonis said that, electoral bonds, we need to have transparency, this is the same Supreme Court when the idea of electoral bonds was first mooted in 2018. The same Supreme Court said that without disclosing names, if instead of taking donations by cash, which is what used to happen for 65, 70 long years, if now donations are going to be taken by check, that is a welcome move, and sometimes anonymity is required so that the corporates who fund a particular party, they are not demonized by a given dispensation. So there is nothing wrong in having anonymity when it comes to making donations under electoral bonds. Now the Supreme Court may have introspected and thought
Right,
differently.
Sanjuji, please.
But let me finish.
Please yield.
But for anybody from outside India to sit here and give
No,
certificates
see,
on integrity
okay,
and democracy
Sanjuji,
to Narendra Modi is absolutely not
Sanjuji,
that,
here,
even
he
if
did,
it is of
he did.
Mr. Daltonis.
Sanjuji, please yield.
Anand, my simple point. 95% of the opposition leaders have been harassed over the last 10 years on charges, many of them fabricated. You had a court actually saying in the Sanjay Raut case, there was no case against him, and the ED went and arrested him and put him in jail. Number two, look at the reality. Even Russia has elections. Even North Korea has elections. It is not holding of a democratic election that determines your democracy's health. It's what happens in between. And therefore, the fundamental point, you look at the almost single-sided annihilation of civil liberties in India. I'll give you an example. Today, if you look at think tanks, whether it's an Amnesty International, whether it's a Center of Policy Research, they are harassed day in and day out. You know, there are, I think one of Lavanya talked about who are these intellectuals. I have a problem with that statement. This is the problem with all the people who belong to the right-wing ecosystem. They actually are anti-intellectual in nature. So if there is an intellectual who questions the government, if there's an intellectual who differs with this government, they will target the intellectual as somebody who's got a very devious ulterior agenda. That is the problem.
Here the problem is, sir, that anybody who does not question the government is not deemed an intellectual. So that problem is with the left liberal, is with the left liberal ecosystem or the Soros-driven ecosystem, which deems that anybody who does not question a person who is functioning and who they have decided is a villain, then that person is also a villain and will cancel that person out also. So Sanjay ji, and with
condescending.
No. She was asking that these 5 people, who they are, these self-appointed people, do they have the ratification and the backing of a larger group of people, academia in the country? Do they really represent Bharat? That's what she was making. And Lavanya ji is a very, very respected intellectual and a thinking person. A thinking person, Sanjay ji. No.
They can ask what is her.
No, that is exactly what I'm trying to say, sir. That Professor Lavanya Vemsani has far greater credibility than a lot of others who brand themselves and portray themselves, present themselves as intellectuals.
Anyway,
so with due respect to everybody else, and with respect to Sanju Verma ji, there is that's the ajibaji between me and her. There is no offense taken. It's all part of the debate, so it's all right there. Lavanya ji, I'm way over time, so I'm going to give you some more time to respond, please. One minute, I'll come to the end, but let Lavanya ji speak.
Yeah. Thank you. Every time we raise some interesting point or some interesting issue with any research or with any entrenched academic notion, instead of answering the point, they start attacking us. And you have seen it right here. I have been called names, and Professor Bobonas has seen the efforts to cancel me. So this happens. I'm not asking, their personal details. I'm asking the data on who collected this, who did this, where they collected this, how much of the population participated in this,
exactly.
The nature of the survey. I'm questioning the nature of the survey and nature of how this is done. It is subjective, as Professor Bobonas has said. A person might express different view. A person living in an urban center might have a different view than a person living in a rural place. And a person living in northern India might have a different view than a person living in southern India. I come from southern India, where non-BJP, it's the most non-BJP ruled states. And I actually come from Telangana, which had an opposition ruled state for a long time, and recent elections are actually won by Congress party. One of the main oppositions that Mr. Jha was indicating.
Right.
So, electoral democracy is well and alive, even though they might say it differently. But the V-Dem democracy report doesn't give the data that is necessary to
Correct.
understand how this is done.
True, because
So,
net
that's the
it is
problem. The
supposed to
nature
be
is-
scholarly work. It's not.
Right.
It's not a political musing. It's not. It's not a YouTube live or a setup of your opinion, of an editorial or a thought of opinion. It's supposed to be scholarly work, and scholarly work has to be backed by robust data. Every assumption that's made, every inference made has to be backed by robust data, and that data is missing. A lot of hyperbole
Right.
is present. Data is missing.
Right.
I have to wind up. The 10 seconds is due. So Sanju Verma ji,
Anand.
for the next debate.